Well, thank you for joining us. Every week after our Words Matter segment, this is one between Kel Richards and I, we get inundated with word suggestions, phrases that you want to know the meaning about and different pronunciations. And English is a pretty tricky language. And every week, Kel and I jump into it, of course. We tackle the words we've been sent through, but there's just never enough time. So this year, demand is so large, I'm thrilled to say we'll be giving you an extra bonus every week. We'll do a Words Matter segment, like we are now, exclusively for the Sky News Australia website. Kel Richards is a broadcaster, our resident wordsmith extraordinaire here on Credlin, and I welcome him to kick off this new development for 2023. But before I do, Kel, my listeners would love to know your background because you've got such a lovely encyclopedic knowledge and love of words. What's the background there?
Well, I'm a journalist by training and by profession. So about 30 odd years ago, I thought, as well as being a general journalist, it'd be good to have a specialty. And I couldn't work out what I wanted to specialise in. And then I sat in my study and I looked at the walls. I looked at all the bookshelves, and there was dictionary after dictionary after dictionary and books about words and language. And I thought, hang on, Kel, it's pretty obvious what you're interested in. And so I decided to specialise in language as a journalist. And so I've been digging into it. There have been a lot of good journalists who've written about language. William Safire for the New York Times and a whole bunch of others over the years. Frank Devine, Miranda's father, he wrote about words and language for the Australian newspaper. So it's an area that journalists have worked in the past, but I've now given 32 years to it, and I still love it. You can't ever run out of something new and interesting to discover. Let me tell you, this you didn't expect me to throw this in. I just discovered that on a sailing ship, ropes are called sheets. Now, I didn't know that. It's all the time you're discovering new things about words and language.
Sheets to the wind.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Perhaps sheets to the wind.
It comes from that. It comes with three sheets to the wind, but a rope is only a rope when it's lying curled up on the deck. Once it's strung up and in place, it's called a line, and it's a line to whatever sail it's attached to, the corner of whatever sail, and it's called a sheet because it pulls the sail into place. So I got into that because we had a question from one of your listeners, which we might get to at some point. But discovering that that's the meaning of the word is just exciting if you really like words and language.
Look, I'm a bit like you. I don't have the same shelf of dictionaries, but in my life in politics, I loved the style guide and the grammar and the protocol. So maybe that's my life after Sky News. I can be the Kel version in those areas. Let's kick it off. There's been sadly some high-profile deaths at the end of last year, the start of this year, and I listened to when they're reported. We rarely say the word X or Y died anymore. We say they tend to have passed. Now, past is very American. I've no issue with passed away. We used to say that in Australia, but we've really adopted this Americanism of past. Where does it come from?
Well, we talked about this a little bit on the air. It actually emerged, and I didn't have time to say this. This is why we're doing this, because I didn't have time to do all the details on the air. It actually originally emerged in the 13th century, and it was a longer expression, pass to God or pass to heaven. And in that form, it turns up in Chaucer and Shakespeare. But then it pretty much died out until the spiritualists came along, and they kept talking about they'd hold their seance, and you know, Martha, are you there? Have you got a message for George? And all that sort of stuff. They used past. They didn't always say passed away or passed on, but they used the one word past because they wanted to make the point that the person is still there, we can still contact them. If you cross my hand with silver normally, but if you pay me enough, we'll hold the seance and we'll make contact because they're not dead. They haven't died, they've just passed. So it is really the spiritualist movement that it came out of, and it was very popular. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, came to Australia in the 1920s promoting spiritualism. And it all began for him when his son died in the trenches in the First World War. So it's from them saying, not dead, just past, that the very common American expression past came to us today.
Now, some of these old Australian colloquialisms, we don't hear them often anymore, certainly not since Kevin Rudd left the political stage, but one of the words that's turned up in the headlines today is Bonza, because there's a new budget airline of the same name. What's the origin of Bonza?
Well, I gave a bit of a summary of the possibilities when we were talking on the air. There's a bloke named Bruce Moore who edited the second edition of the Australian National Dictionary. Very clever man. He's the sort of brain I tap into to learn the stuff I talk to you about. And Bruce is now convinced, after looking at all the possibilities, might have come from the French bon, might have come from the Spanish bonanza, he's now convinced it comes from a British dialect word, which is bonza or bouncer. And it seems to have arisen in Australia and New Zealand at about the same time. And he was talking to a lexicographer in New Zealand who pointed out this possible source to him. Bruce then did the digging and said, that's really it. And can I say the exciting thing about this airline is it might bring the word back. There's been some research done by linguists showing that younger people are not saying bonza anymore. Now, that's really sad. This is a classic Aussie word and we don't want to lose it. So maybe the very fact that the airline exists means it will come back into circulation and we'll hear it a bit more often. I mean, I think we should. Is it a good idea to revive the word bonza? It's a bonza idea.
Oh, absolutely, particularly when we're now getting told to be embarrassed about Australia Day and there's a reluctance to wave the flag. Let's put the language back there front and centre. I didn't grow up using ta-ta, ta-da when I, say goodbye to someone. As a kid, I used bye-bye.
Yes.
Probably used bye-bye for a long, long time. But ta-da was out there, certainly where I grew up. What's the meaning of ta-ta?
Well, it is just an infant expression. We've got 2-year-old and 4-year-old grandsons, and they wave and they shout out bye-bye. And ta-ta is the kind of stuttering utterance that even little kids who don't have much language yet can come out with. So it did come from infants. But for whatever reason, it caught on with adults, and it became regarded as a bit of cute colloquialism for adults to say goodbye by saying ta-ta. First recorded 1820, and then from about 1940 there was this other expression where people walking out of the room and saying goodbye would say TTFN, meaning ta-ta for now. And I have to say, a very long time ago, as a very young broadcaster, I tried signing off radio programs saying TTFN, and I had people saying, Kel, what does that mean? They'd forgotten it by then.
Talk to me about the phrase begs the question. I'm a frequent user of that phrase. I can't claim to know a lot of the origins behind it. Stephen from Cheltenham in Victoria wants to know the origins. He says it's turning up all the time. What can you tell us?
It started out as a technical expression amongst philosophers, and strictly speaking, it is the name of a logical fallacy. Begging the question means assuming in your premises what it is you're trying to prove. So you assume it's the case that X in order to prove X, a circular argument. The philosophers have a Latin tag for it. They call it petitio principii, begging the question. The first philosopher to identify it is Aristotle, so it's been around for a long time. But the very nature of the phrase means people don't understand it. And I've given up trying to say, no. It's a logical fallacy. It's not what you think it is. People use begging the question to mean raises the question. Well, it doesn't mean raise the question. It means making an assumption at the beginning of what you're trying to conclude. But I've lost this battle. I mean, they're not going to use it properly. They're not going to use it the way it was meant to be used. So, actually, it's a good one to avoid. It's a good one to avoid because...
Well, I'm going to have to avoid it because I clearly use it in the wrong way.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, everyone's using it to mean raise the question these days, and if you use it to mean that, people will understand what you mean. So the communication will work. I mean, in that sense, it's not a big deal.
Right, Michael from Lithgow in New South Wales wants to know where the term is Mufty Day. I mean, it used to be, casual Fridays or a plain clothes day when I was at school. But Mufty Day, where does that come from?
Well, Mufti started out as the name for an Islamic cleric or an expert in Islamic law. And it was adapted into being a sort of jokey bit of military slang amongst the British Army when they were serving in the Middle East. First recorded in the early 1800s, I think, when there were British regiments serving in the Middle East. And they started calling it Mufti being out of uniform. If you were out of uniform, you were in Mufti. And apparently this jokey expression arose because of the similarity of the way officers dressed when they were at home relaxing in a dressing gown and slippers and the way they thought the Mufti looked in his robes. So it became that kind of jokey expression for you're out of uniform, you're in Mufti. And then it broadened in meaning. So now being used the way Michael used it, Mufti just means casual clothes. But so that's the progress from being the clothing of an Islamic cleric to being a British general in the Middle East out of uniform to being in casual clothes. That's the way words develop.
Let's stay with attire. If someone's well-heeled, does it just mean they've got money to afford a nice pair of shoes? Is that simple as that?
Oh, no. In fact, it started off having nothing to do with shoes. Started off being all about cockfighting. And what the owners of the birds would do is they would attach a really sharp metal spur to the bird's heel. And that was the weapon with which the bird attacked its opponent. And if it was a good sharp spur, the bird was well-heeled. So it meant a weapon to begin with. And from that cockfighting background, heeled meaning, well-heeled meaning weapon, spread to, of all places, the American West. And there was a time in the American West when if you were carrying a Colt 45, you were said to be well-heeled. Well, nowadays, if you've got lots of the most powerful weapon in the world, money, you are said to be well-heeled. It's another one of these words with this really nice progression over time.
It's terrific. That is a terrific response. One that gets thrown around, I tend to see it more in print than spoken language, Pettifogger, because it sounds like a terrible bad word that perhaps you're not meant to say, but it gets thrown around in relation to politicians. What does it mean?
It's interesting. Now, your background is law, so you'll appreciate this. It started off in law. A pettifogger was originally a lawyer who only took petty cases, or could only get petty cases, couldn't get the big cases. From that, it developed to mean a lawyer who dealt with the petty details, cavilled over all the petty details, quibbled over every little petty detail.
You mean like a pedant? A pedant?
Exactly like that. So that's what it came to mean, being fussy over the petty details and not looking at the big picture, not looking at the big argument, just fiddling around with the petty details. And it could apply to some politicians we know today, if you think about it.
I can see why it was joined up with politicians all those years ago. Kel, this has been fantastic. I have trespassed on your goodwill and time, and now thank you for joining me tonight. We'll do this every week. We'll give people an extension of the program because I know how much they love hearing from you and those explanations. But of course, we want their words, don't we? Send them to me on my Instagram page, Peta Credlin AO. We'll put a post up there and you can add them to that. Or head to Kel's website, auswords.com.au. Until next week, that's it from Kel Richards, Peta Credlin and Words Matter.